There is a spare bedroom in a semi-detached house outside Leeds that nobody has slept in for 6 years. It has a bed in it, made up, with cushions arranged along the headboard the way somebody's mother taught them. It also has, stacked against the far wall in 2 columns that reach the height of the window, 41 shoeboxes. The man who owns them is 34 and works in logistics. He can tell you, without looking, what is in each box, what release it came from, what he paid, and what it was worth 18 months ago. 11 of the boxes have never been opened, not once. The shoes inside them are still wrapped in the tissue paper they left the factory in. And he has a phrase for this that he uses without irony when friends ask about the room. He says, "They're an investment." Last spring, he looked up the resale value of those 11 unopened boxes because the boiler had died and the quote had come in higher than he'd expected. He had paid somewhere close to £4,000 for them. That morning, they were worth about $900. He hasn't opened the spare room door since. And the interesting thing, the thing worth spending an hour on tonight, is that this is not a story about one man in Leeds being foolish. Almost everybody has a version of that room. It might be a drawer, it might be a shelf in a bathroom cabinet, or a cupboard in a kitchen, or a folder of order confirmations going back 6 years. And for about 15 years, an enormous amount of the world's attention, money, and cleverness was devoted to making sure that room kept filling up. Then, quite recently, something started to change. That's what tonight is about. How we got here, what it felt like on the way, and what's been happening over the last couple of years as the whole machine has begun, quietly, to lose its grip. If you're here to fall asleep, this is a good moment to let yourself settle properly. Let the pillow take the full weight of your head. Let your shoulders come down from wherever they've been sitting all day. Let your hands go loose. Nothing in the next hour needs anything from you at all. You can follow it closely, or let it blur into the background, or fall asleep in the middle and never find out how it ends. All 3 are completely fine. That's what this is for. Before we go on, one small thing, and then I won't interrupt again. If this voice helps you get to sleep tonight, leaving a like costs you nothing and helps other people who are lying awake right now find their way here. And if you'd like this to be here again tomorrow night, you can subscribe. That's all. Now let's not think about any of that again. Let's go back to the beginning. And by the beginning, I mean roughly the year 2010, when a particular kind of video started appearing on the internet. The format was extremely simple. A person sits on a bed or on the floor of a bedroom with several shopping bags beside them. They pick up each item in turn. They show it to the camera. They say where it's from and, often, what it cost. Then they put it down and pick up the next one. There is no plot, there is no argument, there is nothing to learn. It is simply a person unpacking things they bought, in real time, at length. These were called hauls, and they were watched, collectively, billions of times. It's worth pausing on how strange that is, in the dark, without rushing past it. For most of human history, watching somebody else's shopping would have been considered close to the most boring thing available. And yet, by the early 2010s, this was one of the largest categories of content on the internet, made by teenagers in suburban bedrooms who were, in some cases, earning more from it than their parents earned from working. Why it worked is not complicated. There is a specific, small, chemical pleasure in acquisition. The moment between wanting something and having it, when the thing is still perfect because you haven't lived with it yet. Haul videos let you have that moment repeatedly, for free, without spending anything. You got the anticipation without the bank transfer. Except, of course, that's not what happened. Because watching somebody else's acquisition doesn't satisfy the appetite. It trains it. Let your breathing slow here. There's no urgency to any of this. The machinery underneath was quietly extraordinary, and most people watching had no idea it existed. A young woman shows you 11 items she bought from a fast fashion website. Some of those items were sent to her free. Some of them she bought with a discount code that also earns her a percentage of every sale made by anyone who uses it. The link in the description is tracked. The brand can see to the individual sale exactly how much revenue that 11-minute video generated. And they will decide whether to send her more things next month based on that number. So the incentive structure is not show people things that are good. The incentive structure is show people as many things as possible, as often as possible, in a way that makes them want to buy immediately. Nobody had to be dishonest for this to work. Everyone involved could be entirely sincere, and the machine would still point in exactly the same direction. And it scaled. What began as teenagers with shopping bags became an industry with agencies, contracts, rate cards, and quarterly targets. By the late 2010s, being the sort of person who bought a lot of things and showed them to strangers was a legitimate career with a recognized job title. Let yourself sink a little deeper now. None of this is a test. You don't need to hold on to any of it. The two territories where all of this went furthest are, on the surface, completely unrelated. One is skincare, the other is protein powder. And I want to spend some slow time on both, because when you put them next to each other, something becomes visible that neither one shows on its own. Start with the bathroom. Somewhere around the middle of the 2010s, a particular idea arrived in the English-speaking world from Korean beauty culture and spread with remarkable speed: the multi-step routine. Not a wash and a moisturizer, a sequence. Oil cleanser, then foam cleanser, then exfoliant, then toner, then essence, then ampule, then serum, then sheet mask, then eye cream, then moisturizer, then oil, then sunscreen. 10 steps was the famous number. 12 was common. Some people ran more. Each step was a separate product. Each product had a purpose that sounded technical, and increasingly the purposes were described in the language of medicine. Actives, acids, percentages, barriers, delivery systems. The bathroom shelf started to look like a laboratory bench, and the person standing in front of it in a dressing gown at 11 at night started to feel like a technician performing a procedure on themselves. It's important to be fair here. Some of it works. There are ingredients with genuine evidence behind them, and there are people whose skin improved enormously once they had access to information that used to be locked inside dermatology offices. That's real and it's good. But the structure of the thing had a direction built into it. If the routine is a sequence, then the sequence can always be longer. There is always another step available, and each step is another purchase. And the purchase is framed not as buying something, but as taking better care of yourself, which is an almost unbeatable frame. Who's gonna argue against taking better care of yourself? Dermatologists started, eventually, to push back, quietly at first, then louder. The most visible of them online is a doctor called Angelo Landricina, who has spent the last few years making the same argument in 100 different ways, that most people need far less than they've been told, that the multi-step routine is a marketing structure rather than a medical one, and that piling actives on top of each other doesn't compound their benefits. He's pointed out that products can cancel each other out, that overloading the skin causes its own problems, and that every additional ingredient you put on your face is another chance to develop an allergy to something. He's also made a point that almost nobody else in the beauty world was making, which is about the rubbish. The rise of single-use everything, sheet masks, toner pads, individually wrapped serum capsules, single-use cloths for drying your face. All of it looking beautiful on camera, and all of it going straight in the bin. He calls it out specifically because a great deal of it does nothing at all that a reusable version wouldn't do. It exists because it films well. Now hold that image, the 12-step routine, the shelf, the technical language, the sense that you are optimizing yourself, and go and stand in a completely different room. Let your jaw unclench. Let the breath go out slowly. In the kitchen of a flat somewhere, on a shelf above the kettle, there are 11 tubs. Whey protein, casein protein for overnight, creatine, beta-alanine, citrulline malate, a pre-workout blend with a name in aggressive lettering, an intra-workout blend, electrolytes, magnesium for sleep, ashwagandha for cortisol, a greens powder that tastes like a lawn and costs more than the protein. This is called a stack, and it is, structurally, exactly the same object as the 12-step skincare routine. Look at what they share. Both are sequences rather than single products. Both use technical vocabulary that sounds like medicine: doses, timings, absorption, bioavailability. Both promise that adding one more component will produce a version of you that is closer to correct. Both are marketed almost entirely through people demonstrating their own routines on camera. Both have a small evidence-backed core surrounded by an enormous ring of things that do very little. And both frame spending money as an act of self-discipline rather than an act of consumption, which is the cleverest part of the whole design. Nobody sat down and planned this symmetry. It emerged twice, independently, in two markets that barely talk to each other, because the same underlying mechanism was operating in both. If you can convince someone that self-improvement is a stack, the stack can always be one item taller. And in both cases, the promise has a structural problem. You can never finish. There is no version of the routine where you have arrived. There's only the next thing you haven't added yet. Let all of that go soft for a moment. Nothing to solve here. Meanwhile, in a third room entirely, something even purer was happening, because it dispensed with the pretense of usefulness altogether. Collecting. Sneakers first, since that's where we started tonight. The mechanism there was scarcity, engineered deliberately. A shoe would be released in limited numbers, announced in advance, sold through a lottery or a queue or an app that crashed. Most people who wanted it couldn't get it. The ones who did could immediately sell it for several times what they paid, on platforms built specifically to make that easy and to publish the price history like a stock exchange. That last part matters more than it sounds. Once there is a public price chart, the object stops being a shoe. It becomes an asset. And people who had no interest in wearing anything started buying because the chart went up. Then the same logic arrived in vinyl figures. Small, stylized, enormous-headed characters from films and television sold in the hundreds of different variants, some of them deliberately rare. People built walls of them. There were price guides. There were people who bought two of everything, one to open, one to keep sealed, because a sealed box was worth more. Then, trading cards, which had done this before in the 90s and did it again. Then, blind boxes. And blind boxes are where the whole thing reaches its most refined form. So let's slow down and look at that properly, because it's genuinely one of the more remarkable pieces of commercial design of the last decade. A blind box is a sealed package containing one figure from a set. You don't know which one until you open it. Some are common, some are rare, and usually there is one, called a secret or a chase, that appears in something like one box out of every 144. You cannot choose. You can only buy again. If that sounds familiar, it should. It's the same architecture as a slot machine, and it works for the same reason. Intermittent, unpredictable reward is the most powerful reinforcement schedule there is. A reward that comes every time is boring. A reward that comes sometimes, unpredictably, keeps people pulling the handle far longer than they intended. The company that did this best was a Chinese firm called Pop Mart, and the character that made them famous was a small elf-like creature with pointed ears and a row of tiny sharp teeth, designed by a Hong Kong-based artist named Kaising Lung. It's called Labubu, and it is by some distance the most instructive object of the last 3 years because its entire life cycle has now happened from beginning to end in public in under 24 months. Here's how it went. The character existed quietly for years without much notice. Then, in 2024, it began appearing attached to the handbags of extremely famous people. A member of a Korean pop group, then a number of others, then everyone. Within months, there were queues around city blocks. There were fights in shops. There were midnight releases. Resale prices ran to 10 times retail, sometimes far more. The company's revenue went vertical. The product line the character belonged to generated hundreds of millions of dollars in the first half of 2025 alone, and the company sold over 100 million units across that year. Its share price rose over 200% at the peak, and it was added to major stock indexes. At one point, it was valued at around $100 billion. Search interest for the toy peaked in August 2025. And then it went down, not gradually, sharply. By March 2026, search interest for the same terms had fallen from a peak reading of 66 down to 6. Resale prices on the secondary market dropped by more than half, with many pieces trading at or below their original shop price, which is the moment a collectible stops being an investment and becomes simply a small object you own. The company, having watched scalpers profit for 2 years, increased production enormously, manufacturing something in the region of 30 million plus units a month, which solved the scarcity problem by destroying the thing that scarcity had created. On the 25th of March 2026, the share price fell over 22% in a single day. And here is the detail that makes it worth telling as a story rather than as a statistic. That crash happened while the company was reporting spectacular results. Annual revenue up 185%. Net income roughly quadrupled. The numbers for the year just gone were extraordinary. The market didn't care about the year just gone. The market had looked at the search data and the resale prices and concluded that the thing was over. From a peak valuation near $100 billion, something like $33 billion of value evaporated. Let that sit for a moment. A company can be doing better than it has ever done on every measure of the past, and lose a third of its value in an afternoon because everybody simultaneously realized the future had already happened. Breathe out slowly. Let your shoulders drop again if they've crept up. The reason to spend so long on that particular toy is that financial analysts covering the crash reached instinctively for two comparisons, and both of them are older than most people watching. The first is Beanie Babies. Small stuffed animals sold cheaply, made artificially scarce by retiring designs. In the 1990s, a genuine speculative mania formed around them in the United States. There were price guides sold in supermarkets. There were people who took out second mortgages. There was, famously, a divorcing couple photographed dividing their collection on a courtroom floor under the supervision of a judge because they could not agree on who got which bear. People bought them not to give to children, but to fund those children's university education. The bubble broke around the end of the decade, and the value went almost entirely to zero, where it has stayed. There are storage units in America that still contain thousands of them, kept in plastic sleeves, worth nothing, belonging to people who cannot quite bring themselves to throw them out because of what they cost. The second comparison is the vinyl figures. That market also oversupplied itself, also saturated, also corrected, and at one point the manufacturer was reportedly left with such an enormous surplus of unstock that it was cheaper to destroy a large quantity of it than to keep paying to warehouse it. Millions of dollars of brand new product, never opened, taken to landfill because storing it cost more than it was worth. That image is worth holding on to because it's the whole thing in one picture. Objects manufactured on the other side of the world, shipped across an ocean, warehoused, and then buried, having never been touched by the person they were made for. And a spare room outside Leeds with 41 boxes in it, 11 of which have never been opened, which is the same event happening at domestic scale. Let it all soften now. There's nothing here you need to fix tonight. So that's the machine at full power. Now let's talk about what changed, because something did. The first crack most people noticed appeared in early 2023, and it happened on the platform where the selling was most intense. A trend emerged with a name that was a small joke about the whole apparatus: de-influencing. The format inverted the haul. Instead of showing you what to buy, people started making videos about what not to. That expensive product everyone was posting about doesn't work. This cheaper thing does the same job. You don't need this at all. Here's what I regret buying. It spread quickly, and there was something almost giddy about the early wave of it. The way there always is when a group of people simultaneously admit they've all been doing something slightly ridiculous. It's worth being clear-eyed about what happened next, though, because it's the most interesting part of the whole story, and it's going to come up again. Within months, de-influencing had been absorbed. The same creators making the same kinds of videos with the same affiliate links, now framed as trustworthy because they were telling you not to buy things, which made the things they did recommend far more persuasive. The critique became a superior sales technique. Not through anybody's cynicism particularly, just because that's what the incentive structure does to anything placed inside it. Then, in 2024, something with a different flavor arrived, and this one is harder to absorb. Under consumption core. The content was almost aggressively boring. People filming their 5-year-old phone with the cracked screen. A bathroom cabinet containing 4 products, all nearly finished. The same 3 jumpers, worn in rotation, visibly worn out. A kitchen with normal, mismatched, inherited crockery. Sometimes with a caption pointing out that this is just how people lived until extremely recently, and that it had been rebranded as a trend. That last observation is the sharpest thing in the whole movement. Underconsumption core is what used to be called not having very much money. And the fact that it needed a name at all tells you how far the baseline had drifted. An entire generation had grown up with an image of normal life calibrated by people being paid to display abundance, and had spent years quietly measuring their actual homes against it. Let your body get heavier now. Let the mattress take all of it. There's a piece of this that deserves to be handled gently, because it's the part that does real damage, and it rarely gets said plainly. The machine we've been describing didn't only sell objects. It sold a standard. If the images you see every day of bathrooms, kitchens, wardrobes, and shelves are produced by people whose income depends on those spaces being full of new things, then your sense of what an ordinary life looks like gets recalibrated without your consent. You end up comparing your actual, real, sufficient home to a set that exists to sell you the contents of it. And the feeling that produces isn't usually recognized as advertising working. It's usually experienced as a vague sense of falling behind, of being slightly less organized, slightly less put together, slightly less finished than everybody else, which is precisely the feeling the whole system needs you to have, because a person who feels finished doesn't buy anything. If any of that lands somewhere true for you, lying here in the dark, you are in extremely large and extremely quiet company. Let it go now. It doesn't need to be examined further tonight. There's a physical part of this story that gets left out of most of the discussion, and it's oddly restful to think about in the way that very large, slow things often are. All of these objects exist somewhere. Consider the ones that never reach anybody. A person orders 3 sizes of the same garment, intending to return 2. A completely reasonable thing to do, encouraged by the retailer free of charge. The 2 come back, and then, in a great many cases, they are not put back on the shelf because the labor of inspecting, repackaging, and restocking a single low-value item costs more than the item is worth. So it goes to a liquidator, or a bale, or a landfill. Brand new, never worn, sometimes never even taken out of the plastic. That happens at a scale which is genuinely difficult to picture. There are entire warehouses that exist solely to process the reverse flow. Things traveling backwards through the system, away from the people who ordered them, towards somewhere that isn't quite anywhere. Then, consider the things that do arrive and are kept but not used. In America, there is an entire industry worth many billions a year built on renting people small rooms to store the objects they own but cannot fit in the buildings they live in. Think about the strangeness of that as a category of business. Millions of climate-controlled boxes in rows on the edges of towns containing furniture and boxes and equipment belonging to people who are paying monthly, indefinitely, for the privilege of not making a decision. Some of those units contain things worth keeping. Many contain things whose accumulated storage cost passed their value years ago, and everyone involved knows it. And the payment continues anyway, because canceling would mean going there and opening the door and deciding. That's not a moral failing. That's just what it's like to be a person, Deciding is harder than paying. Let your breath go long and slow. There's nothing to decide here either. And then there is clothing, which is the largest and heaviest part of the whole story. The speed of it changed twice. First, in the 2000s, when high street chains worked out how to go from a runway image to a garment in a shop in a matter of weeks rather than seasons, which was, at the time, considered astonishing. Then again, much more recently, when app-based retailers began adding thousands of new designs a day, manufactured in tiny initial runs, scaled up instantly only if the data showed people clicking. That second shift is the more radical one, and it's worth understanding because it inverts how making things has worked for most of human history. Traditionally, you design something, commit to producing a quantity, and then hope you were right. The new model produces almost nothing up front, shows you the picture, and only makes the item in volume once enough strangers have proved they want it. Risk is engineered almost entirely out of the business, which means there is no longer any commercial reason to limit the number of designs. You can offer everything because offering costs nothing. The result is a shop with effectively infinite stock, at prices low enough that buying stops feeling like a decision at all. And the reason it feels like nothing is that the cost has been moved somewhere you can't see it, into the wages of people you'll never meet, into cotton and water and dye, into shipping, and eventually into enormous quantities of textile arriving in countries that have no capacity to process it, and are frequently under no obligation to have consented to receiving it. There are places you can look at from the air where the clothing is visible as landscape, not a metaphor, actual geography made of jumpers. Let that image go soft. It's not yours to carry tonight. There's a thread running back through all of this that's older than any app, and it starts with a very particular invention, the shopping event. The end of November discount day in America has existed in some form since the 1960s, but for most of its life it was simply a busy Friday. What happened in the 2000s and 2010s was that it became a global event, exported to countries with no historical connection to the American holiday it follows. And then it stopped being a day. It became a week, then a month, then a permanent condition, with a countdown timer on the page telling you the offer ends in 14 minutes every day forever. Once you notice that timer, it's difficult to unsee. Urgency is manufactured because urgency is what defeats reflection. Given a week, most people don't buy. Given 14 minutes, a great many do. And so the entire architecture of online retail is designed to compress the gap between wanting and paying to the smallest possible interval. Saved cards, one click, buy now, pay later, purchases completed in 3 seconds while you're waiting for a kettle. There's a version of you that would not have bought that thing, and the entire system is built to make sure you never quite get to meet him. Let all of that drift now. Let it get quiet. Something else worth mentioning, because it caused genuine alarm rather than just commentary, in 2024, it became widely noticed that children 9, 10, 11 years old were arriving in cosmetic shops with lists. Not toys, serums, retinol, acids, 12-step routines requested by name for skin that is by definition in perfect condition. Shop staff started talking publicly about the sheer volume of very young customers. Dermatologists began writing about actual damage, chemical burns, ruined skin barriers, allergic reactions in children who had been applying adult actives for months. And what makes it more than a story about pushy parents is the mechanism. Those children were watching the same routine videos as everyone else on the same platforms, made by the same people, and the videos do not carry an age gate. A 10-year-old absorbing the message that a person's face requires 11 steps of maintenance is receiving exactly the content the system was built to deliver. It simply reached her earlier than anybody intended. That was, for a lot of people, the moment the whole thing stopped looking like harmless fun. It's one thing for an adult to buy a serum they don't need. It's another to watch the anxiety being installed in someone who hasn't yet finished primary school. Let that go. Gently. Nothing to be done with it at this hour. Let's come back to something quieter and lighter and closer to home. There is a particular category of object that almost everybody owns and that nobody ever talks about, and I think it's the truest evidence of the whole phenomenon. It's the thing you bought for the life you were going to start on Monday. The bread machine. The exercise bike, now serving as a clothes horse. The unopened language course. The good running shoes, worn twice. The set of paints. The guitar, in the corner, still in tone from the shop. Every one of those was purchased in a moment of genuine intention. Nobody buys a bread machine cynically. You buy it because you can see yourself quite vividly on a Saturday morning in a kitchen that smells of bread, being a person who does that. The purchase is the closest thing available to the feeling of already being them. And then Monday comes, and Monday is like all the other Mondays. There's no cruelty in this. It's one of the more touching things about people, honestly. The sheer persistence of the belief that you might yet become somebody slightly better, and the willingness to put down money on it repeatedly for decades on the evidence of nothing. The machines and the shoes and the paints aren't failures. They're receipts for optimism. Let your hands go heavy. Let the pillow take all of it. We should talk about the tidying, because the reaction to excess has its own history, and it is not a straightforward one. In 2019, a Japanese organizing consultant called Marie Kondo became, briefly, one of the most recognizable people in the world. Her method was simple and slightly mystical. Take everything you own in a category, put it in a pile on the floor, pick up each object individually, and keep only the ones that produce a small spark of gladness when you hold them. Everything else you thank and let go. The response was enormous. Charity shops in several countries reported being overwhelmed with donations. People filmed themselves sitting in mountains of their own clothing, genuinely astonished at how much of it there was. And then, two things happened, both of which are instructive. The first is that a certain amount of what got thrown out was replaced within a year, because the underlying appetite hadn't changed. Only the guilt had been temporarily discharged. Decluttering can function as a purge in the medical sense. It makes room, and the room fills. The second is that the method itself became a product. Storage solutions, matching containers, fabric boxes to put inside drawers, labeling machines, an entire retail category devoted to owning less, which required buying quite a lot. There were people whose homes contained more objects after organizing than before, because now everything lived inside a purchased container. And there's a coda that endeared her to a great many people. Some years later, having had a third child, Kondo said publicly that she had more or less given up on keeping her own house tidy, and that she'd made peace with the mess because her priorities had changed. A number of commentators treated this as a scandal. It seems to me closer to the only honest ending available. Let your breathing lengthen, in and out longer. The same pattern shows up everywhere once you know to look for it. The antidote gets absorbed and sold back. Minimalism in the 2010s became an aesthetic before it was a practice, which meant it was achieved by replacing your possessions with fewer, more expensive, more uniform ones. A minimalist kitchen is not a kitchen with less in it. It's a kitchen where everything has been bought again in matching colors, and the old things have been thrown away. Capsule wardrobes. 30 carefully chosen pieces, which for most people meant purchasing 30 new pieces to replace the 60 they already owned. Sustainable fashion, real and important, and also the origin of a great many collections launched specifically so you could buy something new while feeling you'd bought something virtuous. None of this means the underlying ideas are wrong. Owning less genuinely does make life lighter. Buying better things less often genuinely is better than buying rubbish constantly. The point is narrower and stranger than that. In a system this good at absorption, the critique reliably becomes the next product, and it does so without anybody involved needing to intend it. Let that settle. Let it drift. There's one more corner of this worth wandering through slowly, and it's the strangest because the objects in it were never meant to be owned at all. At some point in the last decade, an enormous number of people began buying things whose entire function was to be photographed. Not used, photographed. Furniture chosen for how it appears in a particular light. Kitchen equipment kept on the counter because it looks correct there. Books arranged by the color of their spines by people who will not read them, sold by the meter for exactly that purpose. A room that is arranged to be seen is a different kind of room from one arranged to be lived in. And the tell is always the same. It's the things that are for guests who never come. The good glasses, the spare set of everything, the candle too expensive to burn. Every generation has had a version of this. The front parlor kept shut, the china never used, the plastic cover on the sofa. It's not new. What's new is the size of the audience the room is being kept nice for, and the fact that the audience is now largely imaginary and permanently present. Let that thought soften. Let the room you're actually in be exactly as it is. Something else that changed underneath all of this, and almost nobody noticed at the time, things stopped being repairable. Not entirely, and not everywhere, but broadly. The economics tipped. When a new one costs less than the labor of fixing the old one, nobody fixes anything. And once nobody fixes anything, the people who knew how stop being trained, and the shops close, and then it isn't possible even when you'd like it to be. Anyone over about 40 can remember when a television was repaired rather than replaced, when shoes were resold as a matter of course, when a broken thing implied a phone call rather than a purchase. That world did not disappear because people became lazy. It disappeared because manufacturing got extraordinarily cheap, and labor did not. And the gap between those two lines is the whole story of the last 40 years compressed into a sentence. The pushback on that has been slower and less visible than the trends we've discussed, but it's real. Legislation in several places requiring that parts be available and that things be designed to come apart. Repair cafes run by volunteers in community halls. A small but genuine revival of skills that had nearly gone. It's not a movement with an aesthetic or a hashtag. It's mostly retired engineers in libraries on Tuesday mornings fixing kettles for free. There's something restful in knowing those rooms exist. Let your breathing follow that. Slow, unhurried. And then there's the question of what all of this has done to the feeling of wanting something, which may be the real casualty. There was, not very long ago, a normal experience of desiring an object over time. You saw it, you thought about it, you worked out whether you could afford it. You went back to look at it again. Perhaps you waited for a birthday. And by the time you got it, the wanting had been going on long enough that the having actually meant something. That gap has been almost entirely eliminated, and with it, most of the pleasure. When anything can be ordered in 8 seconds and arrive tomorrow, the wanting never has time to develop. You get a small, flat spike of acquisition instead of a slow arc. And the flat spike doesn't satisfy, so you go again. The people who describe getting genuine joy from their possessions now tend to be the ones who waited, or saved, or inherited, or found the thing by accident after years of looking. Not because those objects are better, because the wanting had somewhere to live. If you've ever noticed that the parcel arriving is somehow less enjoyable than the evening you spent choosing it, that's not you being ungrateful. That's the mechanism working exactly as designed. Let it go now. Let it drift somewhere else. Now, is any of it actually ending? Honest answer, partly and unevenly. And not in the direction anybody predicted. The collectible bubbles have deflated. That's simply visible in the numbers. The resale platforms that turned objects into assets have cooled substantially. The idea that a mass-produced item bought at retail will make you money has taken a genuine, public beating over the last 2 years. And a reasonable number of people have learned that lesson the way the man in Leeds learned it in one afternoon, with a boiler quote in the other hand. There is real evidence of a shift in mood, particularly among people in their 20s, toward buying less and keeping things longer. Repair, second-hand, wearing things out. Some of that is conviction, and some of it is economics. It's difficult to separate a change of values from simply having less money, and the two reinforce each other in ways nobody can fully untangle. But at the same time, and this is the part that makes the story honest rather than tidy, the volume of stuff being manufactured and shipped is not falling. The ultra-cheap fast fashion apps have grown enormously across exactly the same period. The average number of items a person buys per year has not collapsed. What's changed is not really how much, but what kind, and how it's talked about. Less display, less bragging, less framing acquisition as achievement. So the honest summary is, the culture around consumption has changed considerably faster than the consumption has. Let all of that go loose now. It isn't a problem for tonight. There's a question underneath all of this that's worth turning over slowly as you drift, Because it's older than any of the trends we've discussed. Why do people buy things they don't need? The easy answer is that they're manipulated, and there's obviously truth in it. An enormous amount of skill and money goes into the manipulation. But it doesn't quite hold because it makes people sound stupid, and they aren't. The man with the 41 boxes knows exactly what happened to him. He could give you a lecture on artificial scarcity and hype cycles. It didn't help. A better answer is that buying something is a way of making a small, cheap, immediate bet on becoming a different person. The protein powder is not really about protein. It's about the version of you who trains consistently. The 12 serums are about the version of you who has their life in order. The 41 boxes are about the version of you who has taste, who was there for the release, who knows things. The blind box is about the version of you who gets lucky. You cannot purchase any of those people. But you can purchase a small object associated with them, and for a short window between the order and the delivery, and a slightly shorter window after it arrives, it genuinely feels like progress. Then the feeling fades, which is the entire business model. The fade is not a flaw. The fade is the product. And what makes this bearable rather than bleak is that the impulse underneath it is not a stupid one. It's hope. Slightly misdirected, extremely profitable hope, but hope all the same. People are not filling rooms because they love objects. They're filling rooms because they'd like to be a bit different. And the objects are the nearest available approximation, sold with next-day delivery. Rest a little deeper into that. There's nothing to conclude. One last thought before we start to close, and it's a kinder one. Almost every story told about this subject arrives eventually at blame. Someone is at fault. The companies are predatory, or the influencers are shallow, or people are weak, or a generation has been ruined. And blame is satisfying, briefly, in the way that a tidy conclusion always is. But it doesn't really survive contact with the actual people involved. The woman filming a haul in her bedroom at 19 was doing the job that existed, and doing it well, and often supporting her family with it. The man with the boxes is not a fool. He's someone who found a thing to be enthusiastic about in his 20s and followed it further than turned out to be sensible, which is a description of nearly everyone's 20s. The company that made the small toy with the shark teeth built something people genuinely loved and then did what every company does, which is make more of the thing that is selling. Nobody in this story woke up intending to fill the world with objects that would end up in landfill. It happened because a very large number of individually reasonable decisions were made inside a structure that rewarded exactly one direction. And structures don't have intentions, which is what makes them so difficult to argue with. And the correction, when it came, wasn't a moral awakening either. It was mostly economics. Prices, wages, resale charts, a boiler quote, plus a slow, unglamorous accumulation of people getting tired. That's usually how these things turn, not with a realization, with fatigue. Let all of that settle into the quiet. Let's go back to Leeds one last time, gently, the way you'd return to a dream just before it lets you go. The room is still there. 41 boxes, 2 columns, up to the height of the window. 11 of them still sealed, the tissue paper inside still folded the way a stranger in a factory folded it years ago, on the other side of the world. He knows what they're worth now. He knows the story of how they got there. The app, the cue, the sense at the time that missing a release was missing something that wouldn't come again. He could explain it all quite lucidly to you over a pint, and does, occasionally, with the particular rueful humor people develop about their own past enthusiasms. He hasn't sold them. That's the part that seems to surprise him most when he thinks about it. He could list them tomorrow, take the 900, and have the room back. He hasn't. Because they aren't really shoes, and they were never really an investment. They're a record of a period in his life when he was hopeful in a particular way, and getting rid of them at a loss would mean agreeing out loud that the whole thing had been nothing. The door stays shut. The bed stays made. Nobody sleeps in there. Let all of that soften and drift now. You don't need to remember any of it. Not the numbers, not the dates, not the names of the companies or the toys or the doctors. None of this is a test, and there's nothing waiting for you on the other side of it. Your breathing has already slowed without you asking it to. The weight of your body has already settled into whatever's holding it up. The small tensions in the jaw, in the hands, in the place behind the eyes have already begun letting go on their own. Whatever is in your cupboards is fine. Whatever you bought and didn't use is fine. It's just objects in a room in the dark, not asking anything of you. There's nothing left to follow, nowhere to be. Just the quiet now, and the slow, steady rhythm of your own breath, carrying you the rest of the way down. Just rest for the whole rest of the night.